Well, hello, welcome. I'm going to post the link right now to this unannounced Hangout, but I did just, you're lucky, well, lucky might be the wrong word, but I almost forgot that it was supposed to happen. I'm so busy with work, but I've decided, okay, I'm going to stick with this and be committed and take an hour off. And I got my Sunday hair. I'm in the middle of thought. So who knows? What I'm really thinking about is code. Um, all right, so there's that link. Hopefully that'll work. All right, so there's a link in the comments right now. The should be live by now. Usually takes 30 seconds or something. See if it's playing. So various things to go over today, and if anybody wants to come in, then we could discuss them. For today, it's going to be, I'm going to limit myself probably to an hour. So it says that it's live, but nothing's coming through. Oh, there it is. Okay, so that's going. Somebody has a comment. Oh no, that's not. That's going to be my own illusion. Notice. All right. So I'm going to see if that works over here. Let's go to. I look up myself. This is live now. Let's see if I click on the link. Yeah. So it looks like that link will take you to the Hangout. All right, so a couple things. I just watched a Heitler Day video where he's thinking my statement about words basically being, philosophies. That sounds vague to him and stuff. Well, the point is that a verb like to be brings with it framing. For example, the subject object. It's very deep within our language. We use it all over because it's a philosophy we use all over, trying to study the nature of what something is. And I'm saying that this object now, and then I move it over here, and now, well, it's different. It's lost some molecules. It might have absorbed some moisture. Its position has changed. What makes it the same object is really the connection, the transformation that it took. It's not literally the same object according to the philosophy of the verb to be that says, well, it has some essence. That essence is traveling along, right? So the verb to be, and this idea that you can split the world down into subjects that are some adjective, subjects that have some quality, that's just a theory, all right? And it's a very effective theory. It's useful. But that doesn't mean that it's not a theory. Just like Newtonian mechanics is a theory, it's very useful, it's overturned by general relativity, something many of you don't seem to realize, but is the case. So, a verb to do is representing a framework, a philosophy of interpreting the world as actors, actions, and the things acted upon. In other words, subjects and objects are the actors and the things acted upon. Right? And the verb is some action. And there's a theory that you can have this framework and interpret the world. And I'm saying the verb to do is a philosophy that's going to go further than the verb to be, but it's not perfect either. It's also just a theory. And part of the problem with the theory of action is that it relies a lot on our idea of to be. So it's kind of, it's half-baked, right? It's not, it doesn't have clarity. It's not one philosophy or the other. They're sort of trying to work together, and yet they contradict, and we ignore the contradictions. So the problem with the philosophy of doing is still separating out the subject and object, where the subject and object are really just the endpoints of the transition. They're the endpoints of the verb. Now, in language, we separate them out into these three different entities. Why? So we can reuse like actions, like throwing a baseball, with different endpoints. So it's throwing a baseball, but in this case, you know, John is one end and Sam is at the other end, and that's who the baseball got thrown to. So we want to be able to reuse this idea of throwing a baseball, but it's always going to have different endpoints. So we name the endpoints differently. And this illusion that there's, you know, objects is really just a matter of where we draw the line. And Hythloday posted a video about categorization by this cognitive guy. And, you know, he's pointing out how certain sounds, the reason some nationalities have trouble making certain sounds from other languages is because of our categorization, our somewhat arbitrary categorization of what counts as a similar sound, because there's a continuous spectrum, and we bundle this part of the spectrum as yellow, or this part of the spectrum as B and P sounds, or in our case, we make a distinction, and we make a distinction between the P sound and the B sound, right? And these distinctions are useful. They have to be made. And he says why they have to be made. It's a kind of data compression. If I see 100 shapes, and no two are exactly the same, I can still categorize it into the ones that were, you know, roughly triangular, roughly circular, roughly square, you know, and then I can count those and have this memory about the nature of that set without remembering each and every twist and turn in the little hand-drawn triangles, right? And often this is what's hoped. To the people drawing the triangles aren't trying to make each one unique. They're signifying things that you're supposed to think of exactly the same, even though obviously they've drawn them in different places and they're not exactly the same size, and maybe they're supposed to be equilateral and the lines aren't exactly the same if you measure them. You're supposed to ignore all that. We take this for granted, that categorization is permission and a request for you to ignore things that are considered unimportant to the categorization. Famously, when the object is in time and where it is in space, right? In the case of simple shapes. In the case of like geographic information, of course, where something is then the source of the categorization. So he showed this video, and yet I don't really, he's not getting how what I'm saying is following from that video. Because logic relies on this sort of a priori. A lot of people's idea of logic relies on this a priori notion of what is or isn't a thing, what does or doesn't belong in a category, and where the categories come from, as if the categories might be in nature instead of just in our head. That video that Hythloday showed shows that the categories are in our head and some of the effects of that, right? So it is a problem for people that want to say that these categories are inherent in nature, because if so, why do we see them motivated by the situation, right? They're motivated by your environment to categorize things one way. You're making a decision about which data to compress in a lossy way, which to compress less lossy, which to try to remember exactly, like say the count of these objects, you know, whereas it's more lossy in terms of what was the length of the sides and how straight were the sides and things like that. You're going to throw that information away with one conception of categorization. If you categorize differently, you'd be throwing away different extraneous information, right? And it's not that one way is right or wrong. It's really that you could learn as many ways as you can. Think of them yourself, learn them from different cultures, apply many of them, and see how they work together, because many of them will cross-check each other. You know, if you think there's a fundamental distinction between two letters because they appear in your language, and when you apply somebody else's language and realize, well, that language is just as expressive and yet it lacks this distinction, what distinctions do my language lack, even though I feel it still has expression? And probably there's some meta language that's even more expressive and lacks less. So now in terms of the historical process, it's pretty clear that this is how philosophy works. And we have so many terms now that have come out of the philosophical schools and the debates among the philosophical schools, which did not take place in the mainframe, yet these words make it to the mainframe and become words that we use, right? Going all the way back to other languages, to Greek, for example, and concepts, you know, that are metaphorical, and that metaphor might be reused in a new language. So hensile, you know, is a concept that whatever language you use, you can talk about comprehending an idea with this metaphor of grasping the idea with your hands, whatever word your language might have used for grasp. So further, you know, semi-anecdotally, in philosophy, in school and college and philosophy, a lot of times you start the questions. Now, philosophy in the modern day has gotten over studying the human virtues of, you know, courage and stuff, but they still make a good example. And to a certain degree, I think we should reevaluate all of those classical human virtues that used to be so important in philosophy, like honor and courage and stuff. But let's say there's a reason that the focus fell off of those, and I think maybe we're building up the tools to go ahead and reanalyze them. But regardless, whether it's that or it's the idea of knowing or anything like that, what you'll find in philosophy when you're taking philosophy courses is they'll put you through always the same thing of, well, what do we mean when we say? So let's say we knew we had the idea doctor. We can use the term. We have a sense that there's this complete idea, but so much of it seems subconscious. We ask ourselves, what does doctor mean? We'd go, well, what do we use it? What does it mean in various sentences? We would create all these scenarios, and we start to go, well, it's related to nurses somehow, and it's related to hospitals, but they're not always in a hospital. And it's related to, you know, when we'd be working out all of these little fragments of connection, what you end up with, according to cognitive science, hey, Anakanavad, is always a framework of roles, right? Roles for people and things, and they could be things, but the roles are always for agents, but sometimes inanimate, non-living objects can be used as a role because they're not actually inanimate, like they're just not living, like a storm, you know. And then the relationships between the role. So that if I say doctor, I actually invoke this whole medical framework with nurses and hospitals and everything, coming into it from a certain angle. I can't hear you or anything on account of I. On the other hand, if you mention the word nurse, you're also invoking that same frame, but you're doing it from a different angle, right? And so really what you have in human thinking are these frameworks, and the terms are ways to bring it up. It's like if it was a computer system and there's 5 components, when you run one of the components, it is smart enough to start the other 4, right? And then you have that whole thing with your conscious mind entering in from over here, right? Perhaps not comprehending consciously the whole thing, because the whole point of it is a lot of it is unconscious wiring based on having come to a conclusion that things work a certain way, that there's a certain framework in a given situation, there's certain roles, there's a bad actor and a hero, and there's whatever the roles are, and they all interrelate a certain way, right? And you just enter this network of patterns and meanings from the doorway, you know, the internet, the network connection that is offered by that word. So I think you can see the effect of this in language quite easily, and concepts like to do and to be are very old concepts. There's natural reasons to believe in these concepts, and okay, I'm getting distracted because Anakanavad dropped out. Now, is there a problem again? Because last time Inventive did manage to get in, but he said there was a problem with the sound. So let me see if anybody's leaving me a comment of complaint over there. Hello, Anakanavad again. Now I'm concerned that maybe I should help you in some way. Hello? Your volume was all the way down, Anakanavad. Oh, I see. That's because I muted you on accident when I was testing. I don't know. I'm looking at my comments on the video as a way to find out if people are having trouble. So another thing I noticed is Franks is back. Anybody that knows about Franks, and he's interesting because my perspective is he's coming kind of is a traditional liberal coming from sort of a labor working man's position, which is a faction within liberalism and progressive activism that has always, since the 70s, if not forever, had certain issues with the feminists and sort of a lot of strange bedfellow alliances. And this is also true in the civil rights, because of course people that thought that African Americans, for example, should have more rights, they didn't necessarily think that a woman should have the same position, as a man in the family or something. These are not automatic truths. And yet you have people fight that naturally come and fight together, but over time there's a lot of struggle. And I think Franks is making the same mistake so many people make. He keeps talking, he'll use examples of bad acting by feminists and hateful, really not very civil libertarian, not very human right oriented comments, against hating, the whole gender. And they're obviously people that call themselves feminists that are recognized and academically possibly paid to be academics in the area of feminism that are misandrogynistic. Is that what that? Misandrists. Yeah, I think misandrogynistic would be different. But they do express that. But that doesn't mean that you can characterize all of the philosophy and the issue, the point of the philosophy. Even if every feminist just went mad, was diagnosably insane, it wouldn't change the philosophy of feminism. So, for example, I've been through this before. Back probably, I guess, the late 80s or 90s, whenever it was, people were trying to say environmentalism had got a bad name because of tree spikers, you know. And that was around time my mom started to become more and more conservative, and I'm not going to call myself an environmentalist anymore because they're just terrorists trying to kill lumberjacks with tree spikes. And some people were indeed trying to do that, and that was fucked up, right? And I said that was fucked up, but it doesn't stop other people from going, well, you got to say it more and see what all environmentalists are like. It's over. We've saved the environment. Now stop being terrorists. Right? I said, fuck that, and went away. Basically went away. PETA made animal rights look silly for years and years, but the last laugh, they might be getting the last laugh because they seem to have somehow be legitimizing themselves, and they're quoted in their list of who's most cruel to animals and which labs and stuff. They're kind of covering this area that does have information. Do they give animal rights activists a bad name? Well, no, they could show that not all animal rights activists are sensible, or, because I'm talking about things like they used to make a big deal of having pets is like a kind of slavery or something. And like, yeah, I'm the pet slave, I guess. The way they get treated in my house, it's not. So that seems silly to me. And I, as an animal lover, that's where my animal rights activism comes from. And the idea that my relationship with my pets is somehow wrong, to me that's like some city folk person could think that, because I think people should have more pets, then maybe they'd understand that these creatures are persons based on the fact that they have personality. That's all it takes to be a person. So in my book. Okay, but see, people might think that's silly too. That gives animal rights activism a silly name. Doesn't matter. I can't give a philosophical movement a bad name by applying it in some psychotic way or bringing in my own emotional turmoil, or in the case of feminism, I hate the other gender because I've had bad experiences with them, and so now I'll generalize on the genders, on the movements that are trying to help the inequalities in the genders and blah, 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 blah. I will be impressed with the men's rights movement when it's protest war, because, I saw you. What the hell is going on? So, Anaconavad, you are here. He says, so I'll tell him, I saw you. I see you. You don't get video? Is that what he's saying? Ridiculous. Well, you're not. Video mute is unavailable. You're on a mobile user. Hello. Huh. I could share controls. That's on account of it. So what if I share controls? It's like on account of it, I've given you control, so wouldn't that help you? I mean, it's not like this is semi-public or something. If there was a way to let people in and control who was on dock, I think I would know that by now. I don't know what to do to refresh it. It's just like this is the same way we've been doing it. I wonder if you use that. Here, I'm going to post a different version of the link, and let's see if this makes a difference. Because see, I post what is at the top of my screen, and it has an auth user stuff. And maybe you're trying to auth in as me, or something might have changed how that works. So let's take some of that off. We'll do the link that, besides the part that I think is just for my account having been logged in. And then I'll post that, and then I'll try over here again. So see how it's a slightly shorter, it stops at the auth user part? You know, in this EID, maybe the EID you're coming in as me and it's getting confused. Let's try this. So I close that, I guess. Man, I got some seriously awesome computer stuff going on. Let's see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screens. I got a new thing, then that's a docking station. This is the laptop that my California client gave me. So I can get in there with VPN. That's the way a lot of people like to do it. That's my music and personal machine. And you can't see here, but there's 2 screens for my, whatchamacallit, Linux machine. So live now, boy, I have some really nasty looking expressions like I'm eating something bad there. Okay, so let's say I click on that. What? It's not there yet. Okay, well, I'll just do it myself. Yeah, here, Anaconavad, you're still in here. Thanks for trying. Let's, I'm going to chat something. I'm going to chat a different link to you. That link also seems to work, see, but it might be leaving out some stuff that's confusing the system. So why don't you re-enter through that link if you can hear me. So I'm going to chat over here. It's stopping before the question mark because the stuff after the question mark is part of a query. And maybe it has to do with me being logged in. I don't even remember what the fuck I was talking about. Something about politics, feminists. To me, it's not even on the table to talk about clamping down on the overblow of feminism. If there's too much energy or we're worrying about minutia, which might be the case, I don't have any problem with worrying about minutia, except for priorities. Hey, Slevin, could you try to talk and just show me if there's a problem in general with this room? No, he left. Slevin came in here. Well, you know, fuck it. I'm going to go all the way in. Who am I over here, though, before I reveal myself? Right. So what I really need to do is log out. This is fun, this part. Okay. Oh, Lily. Lily the dog. So I guess that didn't help, or did you try that on account of odd, or? Okay, so what I'm doing, everybody, is I'm coming in from my other computer with another account to see how it works. I guess maybe I should plug in the. I will be waiting time after time. Okay. I will be waiting. That's my wife's fault that I have the song stuck in my head. I love Cyndi Lauper. Okay, so let's see how this works. First of all, let me get my audio. This is so fun for people to watch, but at least I am not flaking out. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, Sunday, 4, it's closed. Excuse me. Lots of coughing in your sound face. Headphones. The input will be headphones. Okay. So that means I should be able to go over here. Oh, I thought it was totally covering it up. So, okay, so comments take forever to come up if you ever check it on 2 different accounts. Oh, they're saying the comments take forever to come up. If you ever check 2 accounts, you'll see that. All right. So am I here both? Here, let me it's my other account. You can see my name, Craig, there, which people have known for years. I guess some of people don't know it because I like to be called Piero. It's not a secret. So I think you're hearing me through this one. Let's see. I'll mute over here. I could do, yeah, but how come I don't hear it here? Why am I hearing nothing over here? Oh, because it's me. What if I do this? Let's see. I'll hear it if I put it over there. I'll just populate my own chit Hangout. Yeah. Oh my God, it works in Unix. I don't even need this to use this Mac anymore. So I don't know what your guys' problem are, except for I did put in the URL differently. I put the URL in. Let's just close this guy. So I put the URL in up to the question mark. So when I put that in the comments, but as I said, they don't seem to have shown up. So let's see, we got another comment here. So I wish there was just a way to say make it public, and when people click on it, it brings them right in. Why not do that? I'm not too fond of wasting time on this stuff. But it's worth it because I would like to have conversations with people. That's the point of doing this live at a particular time interrupting my workday for the good of all of our humanity and entertainment as people that like to converse on subjects. So I guess if somebody really wanted to to type it in, you can do this. Oh, it's going to have to be as much smaller than that. I can't change the size of the text. Okay, that's stupid. Who would want to type all that crap anyway? Anybody want to type that in? Probably not. So, still, you'd think that you could have more than one kind of. Yeah, nobody's going to want to type that up. Oh, yeah, I hear audio. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, so what was it? I need to know the technical. Did you come through my other second link, or did it just start working, or what?
I came through the second link.
Okay, then I learned a lesson. Basically, it doesn't give you a link very often. There's some other way to get a shareable link, like if you leave, it gives you one. But I've been copying the one that's at the top of my Hangout window, and it has this part that says auth user and EID. Maybe that is related to me, and when you use it, it gets confused about who's logged in or something. So I'll just remember to not copy the link at that point. So makes some sense.
Okay. I'm here, so all's well that ends well.
Let's talk. I'm going to get some coffee real quick, but don't go. We'll have it.
I'll stay here.
It doesn't give you a link very often.
Anything? Anything?
All right. Hello. Thanks for waiting. And then I left my coffee. I went snowboarding. I thought I'd be out of shape because I haven't really been doing an exercise program. I always try to, something. But going up and down this loft, and the fact that I'm absent-minded is like I come up, my glasses are downstairs. I go down to get those. I leave my coffee downstairs. It's like 5 or 6 times up and down the ladder every time. It's like 100 times a day. And so I had no problem snowboarding, except for staying up on the snowboard and giving myself a concussion, but that wasn't related to me being out of shape. That was coordination. So anyway, so how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well. You're in Maine right now.
Yeah, I'm back in Maine.
You moved. I thought you were in California or something like that.
I went to California for a week for a contract. To start a contract. I'm working now. It's a 4-month thing, but I went out to their site and they set me up to be able to get into their VPN and whatnot. So, but this weekend I'm working for another person on the weekend, so it's hard to change tracks.
Imagine. So, what's the issue we're discussing?
Well, what I was going through when nobody was here was just the various things we've been discussing with Hythloday. I also saw your video where you mentioned the Hythloday and his view of language. I have to admit, I didn't really understand his video on language. I had a similar reaction that he always seems to have to some of my stuff when I think it's so clear what I'm saying. You know, I didn't really. You mentioned that he was saying language is some sort of concrete mathematics of you were attributing to him saying that what language is like reliable or something.
Well, I certainly don't think it is. He thinks that it is. I suppose. You know, he's not here to express his opinion, but I think that language, like anything that you put up as a positive statement, can be read, you know, any number of ways depending on what's in the audience's mind.
Well, I would think it'd be pretty clear. For that matter, looking in language for how things work, that's what shows you that language is like the repository of old philosophy that may have become.
Gotta seize up here.
You know,
my screen just froze with you talking.
So if you're going the language to get some finality on something, yeah, you're going to get a judgment, probably from a dogmatic philosophy that has been ossified into the language, and it's going to give you a final judgment because it's a dogmatism that believes in final judgment. Obviously, there's a lot of contradictory philosophies stored in language.
Well, yeah, and watch a, or, you know, what's the stereotypical expression for an argument or a disagreement? It's a Torah debate, you know, between two rabbis. Even though it's the same language and it's been the same language for thousands of years, they scream and yell at each other for hours and hold grudges for decades over how one word could be used to alter the meaning of one line. You know, why do we have these disagreements on anything? Why do we need lawyers to interpret laws for us if the language is so clear? In ancient Athens, they had all the laws written up in public. There's no big law books or anything like this. Anybody who could read knew exactly what the law was. You didn't need 1,000 lawyers. Maybe because language isn't as we thought it was.
Yeah, I'm at the point where I think it's funny to even have that kind of reliability. I mean, to this notion of reliability, I got to that kind of around the time when, you know, for years saying there's no absolutes, and people pull this, well, what about that sentence? And it's like, well, no, because language is an absolute. The words in that sentence don't have absolute definitions. So there is no, you said a sentence, therefore you believe in absolute. No, I'm saying that the sentences have truths that are not absolute. They're relative. They encapsulate an illusion and some information as to about why that illusion appears to be the case as it does. And nothing in that is absolute just because they're words. And so the assumption, that it tends to be classically that language somehow has an absolute meaning, that when you say a statement, you can judge it as true or false because you understand what it means well enough to judge, or in all interpretations, and that's never the case, obviously.
No, it's you have to use to define other words. There's the acute right from the beginning. You need words to figure out how to use other words. I don't think we figured out yet how kids learn language. Or at least we can watch what they do, but I don't think we understand how the thoughts work, how they assimilate themselves. That's probably intuitive, as I mentioned in another video, moving my hands and everything. That's purely intuitive. I have no idea how I'm manipulating my nervous system from the inside. I can study the functions of my nervous system, but from the outside. But how it actually works from the inside, I don't know. How about language? How does that work from the inside? I'm trying to say something, and I'm using certain words to do it that work for me. But how do I choose each word as I go along? Do I understand how I'm actually putting all this together? And do I understand how I'm actually talking in the same way? Do I understand how I'm using my hands? I don't know. So I would say that in the heat of the moment, it's even easier to be misunderstood. But I guess in the heat of the moment, you have the latitude to, rephrase what you're trying to say. But I don't think you can get true false out of language. No, you can get true false out of language if you set the parameters yourself, if you deliberately sort of, rule out anything that's vague or whatever. But if you're going to start discussing anything even remotely subtle, I think you're going to run into a lot of trouble. And again, it's the same thing. How do you interpret what was written in a document? Why do you need a lawyer to do that? It should be very clear. If language is so clear, you don't have to think about things like intent or spirit of the law or anything like that. All of that stuff has to be read into it. What's the intent?
Yeah, and it's a funny thing too, because you're prone to people acting like you're anti-logic. I am too, to a certain degree. You a little bit more so, because you will go ahead and criticize logic at a certain point. Yet I had known you, for a while now, and you're clearly a logical person. It's like you know how to swing a hammer, and then you go, but a hammer isn't the only tool in the world. But it's the only tool, that and the nails. You built a whole house. You didn't need any other tools. You didn't drill or anything. But it doesn't mean it's the only other tool I could have used, and it certainly doesn't mean it's the only other tool. And then you're prone to, you don't like hammers. You deny that hammers are awesome. And you're like, no, hammers are awesome. And I could see that you're using this reasoning. To me, a similar thing is with Thou Art That. He definitely is on the thinking everything is information, in the sense that somehow this defies materialism, right? I have an idea that everything's information that's unified with materialism. He's more on we're in a dream universe of some sort. But he and I are very compatible, because he also agrees we have this stream of our perceptions, and we're learning from them. So the end result of doing that is going to be this empirical and logical thing based on the information we have. To me, it seems like we could all unify all of our different positions by just going to, I think this is what science has done. It's like not their personal stream of perceptions, but this filtered out stream of perceptions of the experiments they've done. Like, if we count only our experiences during the experiments that you can run to, what do we see? And we will relate that. I believe that the universe is expanding, or that it isn't. I believe in dark energy is this or that. Those differences are really crucial. It's what the whole argument is about, and yet they're compatible because they're going from a stream of evidence, which ultimately, for us, non-science is softer, philosophical inquiry. Why can't we just say, look, we've got information going by, and we're reasoning with it? And usually when people really insist that there's a problem with, for example, your idea of logic, or someone like Thou Art That, who are actually very good decent logicians, let's say, at least, I mean, we're not any Bertrand Russells, any of us, but we're decent, logicians. And, they can go ahead and criticize you on logic because they don't really understand. They don't understand logic as a system. That one of the main things I notice people that are from that point of view rarely understand is that there's more than one kind of logic. That there's first order, second order, modal logics. They don't get it. So they need to.
I think as well, and this is really come out for me. I think people rely on logic, or some people rely on logic so that, in a sense, they've so controlled their way of thinking, or it has just evolved this way. Either logic or solipsism, and you can sort of see the animosity that you get, that you elicit when you do this, which may be the result of that. These people need tangible truths to build from. Otherwise, they're lost. My old kind of existential panic kicks. I can't be sure of anything. Oh my God! Okay, I didn't expect anybody to stay calm. In that. So that's what I think. I get criticized pretty harshly for it. And I think and it goes me back when I do see it, how harsh it gets. I think that might explain the fact that you're sort of, in a sense, whether you like it or not, you're arguing the universe of existence in their world. Yeah. Because I say, look, I'm not arguing the world out of existence. I'm simply saying we can't be 100% sure, but we can make some pretty good judgments based upon what is probably true, et cetera, instead of, saying that we're certain of something. I would say that we're pretty sure of it, whatever. And some people that's not good enough. It doesn't work for them. They need solidity. And when you challenge that, when you challenge an absoluteness to it, I guess the emotions kick in and you can't reason anymore. I don't know. I'm just trying to guess what exactly the source of the hostility is.
Well, I think part of the problem is, you could say they're kind of taking it, there's an atheist angle, and they're taking logic like a Bible. Like most people take the Bible. Haven't read it, got told about some passages. Every Sunday somebody tells them about some passages. They could feel like, I don't have to go understand logic. I don't have to go understand the Bible. The knowledge is in there. If I need it, I know where to go get it. I don't have to go to the library. The books are there. And the knowledge is there. And but I don't see it as religious because, of course, being a fan of ancient philosophies, obviously, this started before any religions. They're dogmatic philosophies that have that attitude that there's some sort of a book, and they always spawn a lot of people that don't fully understand the philosophy, but are its most ardent supporters. And to me, that's how most of these people are using the idea of logic or reason sometimes. Or the skeptics, where skeptic means anti-religious, they're just using it as a dogma. So they don't have to look into this thing that's the answer to all of everything. They don't have to become experts in it because it's there somehow. So that's the way I see the phenomena. But I'm sure there's more to it. And I think your idea of how people's idea of existence, if you criticize the tools, to them it's like taking existence away. But again, this is why I want everybody on the same page of, let's just all admit, whatever we think is behind this phenomena, we are starting as living creatures with this stream of consciousness. No matter what we do, no matter what we think, any of our theories about what that means, where it comes from, what's inside it, what it means, the fact that this coffee cup I had to go get is still here, and when I hadn't gone get it, it wasn't here, that consistency, whatever that means, none of it can take away, none of our interpretation can take away the stream. This idea that you can render existence meaningless, and it's like this idea that you can come up with an idea where nothing's really going on. No. Something's going on. We are starting from something's going on, right? So you can't really rob people of their existence by robbing them of their explanation. But you put them back in this wash of information where they're a confused little baby, right? Because they're like babies. They're like, I got the stream. I have no shit idea what's going on with it. And they don't want to be in that state again. It was painful in a sense to be in that state once you've learned to change shapes into objects. Now, for the baby itself, it enjoys just looking at it, and I imagine it's like the baby's constantly looking at an optical illusion where the face becomes a vase, and then the vase becomes two faces again, and they're fine with that. But once you get past the point, and it's every time you look at an apple, you see an object, not patches of colors, you're able to distinguish it from the basket and the other apples. You don't want to go back into this having to look at the raw data. And I say this, and I'll finish up just from a point of sympathy. I happen to have a mental metabolism where I like that. I like going back to basic. I like to sit and look at a view just flatly until things start to fade out and the shapes are just colors and stuff. I enjoy playing with watching optical illusions and trying to get them to flip back and forth. So to be fair, you know, it's easy for me to say, look, when in doubt, just go back to these shapes, these color shapes, the sound shapes, all of the, you know, your feelings of hunger, all your feelings, emotions, just go back to them. We can always be on the same page that we're sensing those things, and then work back up to see what we agree or disagree on. And yeah, people react almost like you're telling them, like their fear of death gets invoked. I want you to go back to, you know.
And again, as you say, some people think it's just kind of neat to have their mind blown out like that and have all their presuppositions obliterated, or at least severely tested. I go, wow, that's neat, that's cool, you know, it's, yeah, I never thought of that before, you know, or whatever. Whereas other people, I guess, it's just they're so constructing their universe, their epistemology or whatever, at the very basic level, by things that they assume are absolutely rock solid. And fear, I suppose, you know, it's fear is an interesting emotion, and you know how it can rob you of your reason, you know, and I don't know, what would you actually call that feeling when your certainties are being abolished? As I say, I like watching well, it's not a nice thing that's happening to the Islamic world right now, but they're undergoing an absolutely mind-blowing case of this en masse. Their entire civilization is having their blinkers yanked off violently. And it's basically the same reaction. You get, you know, a lot of people are just, whoa, this is really weird. A lot of people actually can adapt quite well. And a lot of people are joining ISIS and throwing bombs because they simply can't face their certainties being so effortlessly obliterated like that. What will people do? And how does that fear of not having your footing anymore overcome the rest of your reasoning faculties? I wonder about that sometimes. You know, the fear and the antipathy of the implications of losing your absolute certainty. What does that do to the rest of your reasoning faculties? When your basics are challenged, you get a fear about that, and that in turn possibly could overwhelm the rest of your reasoning. Just a thought.
Right, yeah, I mean, I think about that is that, so the interesting question I can't answer is, what is that feeling? Because, you know, I've just always used it as confusion. Confusion is actually a good thing. It's uncomfortable, your brain naturally wants to sort it out, but if you just let yourself be confused and keep looking at the phenomena, your mind will start to get ideas about how it appears to be this case, think it's not confused, you double check, find out, oh, I'm still confused. And it's just, but there's probably a different feeling because there is a painful kind of confusion that, you know, maybe we'd make a distinction. On the other hand, with the ISIS thing, you know, to me, I can't really analyze. That's not a religious phenomena to me, except for the fact that oppressed people will go to their fundamental philosophical or cultural roots. That is where they will go, to their local heroes, to whatever. And so I think the real phenomena there for me is about fear. I think that we have been enslaved for people, most of the people, by the powerful and the kings for at least a few thousand years. Looks like probably the phenomena goes back 10, 20,000 years. I'd like to think it doesn't go back further. I don't think all village-oriented humans lived in this domineering way with each other, but it might go back all 100,000 years. Who knows? I mean, the Cro-Magnons killed all the other hominids, you know, 60,000, 40,000, 60 to 40,000 years ago. Maybe they, you know, that's pretty much looks like a sign of a warlike nature. So maybe it goes way back. But I do think that slavery and the actual institutionalization of slavery, we can see that that's really, it comes to us from an unwritten part of antiquity. So it was going on 5,000 years or so, but it really became more and more refined. And the otherness of the slaves, as opposed to saying, hey, those slaves are just like me, but they lost the war, the whole otherness of these slaves, and like maybe they're not even human, and treating them like that, you know, kind of culminating in American slavery. I think that history has, they've tried to train us, right? And it's a good thing. We've never been trained to want to be slaves. We keep having a slave revolt. Every slave society's had a slave revolt. So they're failing to breed us into willing slaves. They've failed to breed us into the cows that want to be eaten. But they have done a lot of mind fucking of us. And we are really frightened, and justifiably frightened. Frightened about saying the wrong thing, wearing the wrong clothes, the wrong thing. It won't be professional. It won't, you know, even people like me that, as I'm younger, wanted to flout those rules. You know, I will put on a jacket and go work with people. Yeah. Okay, great. All right, I'll see you later. So anyway, just to wrap that up, so I think we're having a hangover of fear, and I think people in a society like in the Middle East, where that oppression has continued on really until their revolutions, and arguably even after their revolutions through the complicity of Saudi Arabia, you know, they've been very much in this slave-oriented kind of fear mongering, and I think that creates the psychological situation where the first most obvious way out to somebody who gets so afraid they're like, fuck it, I'm not going to be afraid. They're not saying they're not going to die. They're saying, you know what, I am going to die, fuck it, I'm not going to be afraid. And so that's like you flip the coin and suddenly you're a fear monger. It's like, what's my main escape? This fear so ancient, you know, and so overpowering. It's to become the villain. It's to become the monster. You know, and so I think that's what we see going on, and that most of the religious angle is just the justifications you can have from most religions, especially these Judeo-Christian ones, which have this angry God in it that is like and you like reading Nietzsche, and that's just basically, you know, his whole idea that Christianity is a plot against the rest of the world that had enslaved them, and so Christianity becomes a slave morality and religion from Judaism, which wasn't invented as a slave religion, or was it? Or was
Warrior
it?
act.
No, because it goes back before Egypt, so we could say, hey, this is actually just like a Native American Indian kind of, you know, they had their own philosophy, and it got processed through an experience of slavery, basically, but it wasn't created out of that. But then the Jewish people, the Jewish intellect, became experts in slavery thousands of years ago, and expert condemners of it thousands of years before it left the mainstream as an okay thing. And so I think when you have the Muslim as well, it's like there's a fuse. There's a fuse hooked into this being slaves, how you react, how something that seems innocuous, like being told to eat food that wasn't prepared correctly and things, it can seem like a big thing. Well, why? It is a big thing. The fact that you don't get to hunt what kind of animals you like or grow what kind of fruits you like, and you have to eat whatever is given to you in this institutional environment, you know, you do have to fight against that. And I think Christianity and Islam both have that progeny and are easily exploited when fanatics are called for to try to free a people, right? Because it's like, we need to get our fucking crazy guys to go out there and do crazy shit because this is not okay, and that's what we see happening. So
an interesting take that I always have on that is, I'm not sure, well, I'm not saying that Nietzsche's wrong in this, but I don't think that the ancient Hebrews were the only ones who discovered Jesus and how a slave morality can influence people's minds. The way that he imputes it to the Hebrews, being confused, basically you're coming at people from a position of utter inferiority. You create this mythology wherein weakness and obsequiousness and everything is good, and it's actually rather bad to be cruel to help with people. That's a guilt-based concept as well. The Irish Catholic culture is absolutely guilt ridden. It's crazy guilt ridden.
Well, you're being real choppy, so I want you to repeat some of that. So I think I missed I mean, I just got various stray words. So the part I got is you're saying there's some other societies, and that may have also had a history with this. I think I would assume that's true, but it's just like very rarely is the history of slavery been written from the point of view of the slave. So I think it's hard. I don't know of the other examples. That was one thing you were saying. And then the last thing you were talking was about guilt, which I find is very interesting. Catholics and Jewish people very similar in the guilt area. Where does that really come from? Is that something introduced? Is that how? I don't know. What do you think? I mean, do you have a knowledge on this history of guilt in Judaism, or maybe you were saying something else about guilt? But anyway, there you go. That's what I got.
The guilt is huge, massive in slave morality. You were talking earlier about feminism. I would say that guilt is also massive in feminism. In the entire discourse, you should believe in morality, you should be this, that, or the other. But the ancient Celts were totally dominated by their priests, the Druids, and I suspect that the Druids used guilt and slave morality, but kind of mind gaming on their societies. Because interestingly, the Romans did nothing else. They isolated and murdered all the priests. They didn't do that to the ancient Hebrews. They didn't do that to anybody. But they saw the enormous power that the Druids had over these people who were head and shoulders taller than the Romans, who were better fighters, man for man, than the Romans were. And they couldn't believe that they were so subservient to priests. And I would say that it's that kind of thing. I wouldn't say that it's a slave-based morality, but it's morality based on moral absolutes and guilt. You should behave this way.
My guess, though, is that now guilt is a candidate for the kind of thing that a slave master might want, or somehow. But I wonder. I never really have thought about it. Maybe that's the problem. But that like guilt is something that was installed by. I think total deference to the Lord and an angry Lord. That's pretty obvious. Do what your slave master says. He might be angry, he might be rude, whatever. He's the guy. But I don't see with guilt. I think guilt might, it might be a more natural human thing. And I say this as somebody that's totally against guilt, because I feel that guilt is actually. I just heard an interesting thing I hadn't known or I had forgotten, which evidently in German the word for guilt is the same as for debt.
Yeah, that's Nietzsche.
Okay. So that's very interesting to me. Yeah, so I should have known that. Maybe I'd heard it before, but I was thinking about this. So on the one hand, it makes it sound like if you're in debt, you're a guilty person. Okay, Spain. On the other hand, it's sort of a different thing as well. It goes more with what I think would be good about guilt. See, I don't believe in guilt, but I do feel a sense of responsibility, and I believe that you should use that to pay back the debt, some sort of reparations or a fixing of the situation. Not reparations where it's really just giving money to people, though that can be it, but somehow doing something to fix what was wrong. So there's actually a good attitude to me in that German link. They're saying, because what I don't like about Western guilt is it's kind of like, I feel guilty, I've slapped myself on the back, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? So I have nothing to do now. I don't have to make up for my misbehavior. And so that's the part I don't like about guilt, where there's all these shades of guilt, and certainly a lot of societies, like, I don't know, what do you think with the Celts? I mean, I'm not even sure that the Jewish version of guilt is like that. I think the Catholic version of guilt, sadly, was turned into that because the confession is a way to say, just dump your guilt, and then boom, it's over.
Well, it's interesting. There is actually Catholic guilt, first of all, is different from Jewish guilt. Jewish guilt is more or less your obligation to a larger community, whereas the Catholic version is your moral obligation to be a fundamentally good person in every possible way, and
to God, not to community. Yeah.
Yeah. So and that's a gross simplification, of course, but yeah, but the way that I would actually put forward my fundamental view on the debt thing, the guilt, gold, that kind of thing. Um, in the earlier form, when you're dealing with capability, when you're dealing with restoration, when you're dealing with responsibility, you have, like the old Norse system or the Anglo-Saxon system, Vergeld. It's war money. In other words, I cut your hand off, I have to pay you $50,000 or something like this, or I steal your pig, I have to replace the pig.
What'd you
Plus, I
call it?
have to.
It's called blood money
Vergeld.
too. Wergel, and then you said something kind of money, but that wasn't blood.
I think it's war money. I think, or no, Krieg is German. I can't remember what it actually comes from. But
anyway, that's minutia. I was just curious, yeah, because obviously we have this problem in which I would say is not such. We say it's a part of Islam. I think it's more a part of Arabic and Middle Eastern cultures because it's been a part of all sorts of cultures. Blood money. You got in a fight after the bar or whatever, the equivalent, and you killed a cousin, and now it's like, yeah, we know that just happened. He helped pick the fight, whatever. You owe us now. We lost the guy. You managed to live. And if he had killed you, we'd be paying it. And they actually, oddly enough, fulfill those debts. What's the American tradition? Hatfields and McCoys. We'll just fight until we wear out. There is no responsibility for the half mistake. You're either purely right or purely wrong. There's no reason for reparations in either case, really.
And if you're the injured party, you decide what the penalty is going to be if there's a feud on. Okay, so you stole my pig, I'm going to burn your barn down. Something like that. Yeah, but the point I was going to make was, in Christianity, especially in Catholicism, especially in the way it's interpreted, say, by the Irish or by the Croatians or Poles. Now, those are heavily into the guilt thing. Italian, not so much. Latin American, not so much. But Nietzsche sort of came at that as Christian guilt that you can't repay.
Yeah.
It's like
you can't repay it. You've offended God. You can't repay it. So why have reparations for the victim? Yeah, I think that's how it works.
So you're in a perpetual state of obligation to God. In other words, to the priests, right?
Yeah.
You're born with original sin, so you've already got a deficit on your pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
Or you got a deficit, and then you can't avoid sinning in your life. You pile up more guilt. And so you're always in Nietzsche said that Christian guilt is essentially a debt that can never be repaid to God or by the people who speak on God's behalf.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you mentioned Sharia or another type thing. Well, at least there's a limit to what the punishment can be. Nowadays,
man, we lost you again. The punishment for what?
Well, the punishment actually, it often just keeps going. Like, think about this, okay? Here's a good example of modern guilting and modern sandbagging and shaming and all this stuff. Atrocious crime on video. Which one is it? A guy in, I think it's South Carolina, shot him running away, a black guy.
Okay, right. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. Now think of that, okay? That guy, let's just convict him of everything right off the top. He's a racist. He's a sadistic murderer because he shot a guy for running from a non-violent crime scene or even misdemeanor scene, I guess. Whatever. Okay, so what does he deserve? Let's say for his crime. He deserves, I don't know, if you believe in the death penalty, he deserves the needle. If you believe what could he do or what could be done to him for him to fundamentally atone for what he did? He can't now. He's now on YouTube all over the place. Everybody on the planet hates this man's guts. I'm not speaking in his defense.
Yeah.
I'm just saying this it's a good example of the debt that can never be repaid. He's going to get the normal punishment for the crime. Well, I would assume that he will. He's going to get charged with murder. He's going to
Yeah,
go to
that's
prison.
not at all certain.
Yeah, but let's just say that things
Well,
work out.
compared to normal, he's going to get charged and have a trial. So compared to normal, that's like getting convicted compared to what normally happens. So that's the angle you're coming from. So right, he's got to go through this process where he's not going to be treated, at least not fully treated the way the cops normally are, and he's going to have to be judged. And yet, exactly, there's nothing he can really do. And yet we see, like in South Africa, there is a thing, and they decided, well, let's get these guys up here to talk about their crimes. Or I was just reading in the New Yorker, Seymour Hersh went back to Vietnam, and at the My Lai museum was a kid who was at My Lai, and there was the first guy ever to come from Charlie Company, and he was sorry. He was saying sorry. I haven't seen this, but they were talking about a documentary I think the BBC had done, and they're recounting it, and the guy's sorry, but he wouldn't tell to this guy Kong, who was a victim of it, who's not anti-American, but he also hasn't forgotten. He wouldn't go into the details. He's like, I'm sorry, but I didn't shoot villagers. And Kong's like, I want to know what happened that day. I want to know if you could eat a meal when you went back to base. I want to know how you felt. I want to know what you saw. I want to know, and he could have said, yeah, I was the guy that went into your hut and killed your whole family and left you all for dead, and you survived. This guy Kong would have found that more forgivable. But what he couldn't forgive, because this soldier, who obviously went out of his way to go all the way back to the site, there's a lot of praiseworthy for him doing that, and to feel sorry. He's gone a lot of the way to, trying to repair or something. But this guy wasn't having it because it's, look, you won't open up and say what really happened. We're not getting closure. You know things I'd like to know. We should actually go through that. And because the guy actually is asking, there was a Remembrance Day happening at the villages, and the guy was asking if he could go, and Kong was like, no, you wouldn't be welcome there. And the fact is, in the interview, or according to the article, this guy Kong would have felt differently if this soldier had just opened up about his crimes. So it gotten to the point 30 years later, or 50, 40, whatever it is, and it's getting crazy long ago, I guess almost 50 years. I mean, I was 1 or 2 when My Lai happened. That gets to the point where really, if you, the criminal, and this is where I was saying South Africa did this, if you will just go through and tell us from your point of view, you actually can repair. Maybe there's people just on the other side of the threshold, maybe put in the same situation. Maybe you could help them keep their head clear if they get thrown into the similar situation, or maybe you can just help the living victims to have closure. Who knows what the good of it is, but I agree with this principle of, no, you got to delve in. You can't say sorry and move on. You got to dig in. Americans especially, but a lot of Westerners, they hate to dig in. It's like, stop thinking about it. So anyway, I don't know. It's
let's talk about what you. We won't talk about. I have to would like to say about this stuff, but let's go to My Lai. We can say that My Lai just was not justified. You can't do things like that, even during the war, especially in a war where the Americans were trying to be surgical. At that point, the Liberals were still in charge of the war, and they were trying to say to our soldiers what simply do what we tell them to do, and we're keeping war here in Vietnam. That's what they thought they could do. But you can't do that. Now, let's just say though, this is a kind of a controversial question, but I'm going to ask it. Let's say you were one of the guys who performed, the worst atrocity in My Lai. Let's say that you were the guy who did it. You go back to the States. You battle heroin for the next 10 years afterwards because of your experiences in Vietnam.
Yeah, your PTSD.
Yeah, your nerves were already shot from fighting a crazy war. Everybody back home hated you for being there. You committed an atrocious crime while you were there, and you came back and people just told you that you were a monster, which you kind of knew that you were anyway based on your behavior back there. So you become a complete wreck of a human being. Your next 30 years are destroyed. You bring that to the table and say, I have some atonement here? What I have gone through because of what I did? Is that something you actually now say? Believe you me, you weren't really victim that day. I was the perpetrator. I was also a victim of the horrible things that happened that day.
Yeah.
And what that day thing did to me. Is there any way to bring that to the table?
Yeah. Well, in recounting this thing, for example, okay, so in My Lai, or My Lai, they went out there, thought there was going to be Viet Cong. They're rounding up all of the villagers into groups, but you know, there's soldiers giving candy to the kids and talking to the kid, right up to the point when the only guy that ever got convicted of anything there came in and said, "We're going to waste him." And the guy, most of the soldiers supposedly in that particular moment refused. Now, there were other people that were killed in villages, so it wasn't the only part of the massacre, but because hundreds were killed, right? Um, uh, and most of the guys refused, and the one guy was like, "What, waste him?" And his officer's like, "Yeah," and he started doing it, but the other witnesses were like, he was crying. He got his foot blown off unrelatedly a month later, and people heard him saying to the, "You're going to go to hell for what you made me do," to his commanding officer. Because they're in this weird situation where I just watched this thing called, I forget, but it's about where these in Afghanistan, this one squad leader started telling people how they could get kills. Basically drop weapons. Like the first one they did, they threw a live grenade out there, shot the guy in the fields, the farmer in the fields, and said he threw the grenade at them. And these guys that come back, some of them will talk about it and they'll admit about it, and it's this fog of war. Plus, it's easy if you have some psycho that wants to kill people to convince you because you've seen your friends die. The kill ratio for infantry is not so high. Like, we are killing thousands of Afghanis for everyone that we lose, but we're doing that hundreds of times with their bombing. Those infantrymen are over there watching their friends get blown up by IEDs. It's easy for some psycho racist to come and go, "Look, they're all the enemy. None of them are innocent." You saw it in Vietnam. You see it in Afghanistan. You see it in every war, especially occupations, actually. So they are the victims. And, I said one guy recently was complaining to me about this Vietnam, the way the vets were treated. And just so long as you don't do that, and I have mixed feelings because there is some culpability in the soldier. On the other hand, no, they're the workers, and they're one of the main victims. Right, the soldiers that live, and we know that now because we have these statistics where we've lost like 10 times as many soldiers to suicide that we've actually lost on the field. What does that tell you about the fucking toll on the guys that don't blow their heads off too? Yeah, so they are a victim, and yet they're culpable too. There's times where these guys have to pay for what they actually did.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And Vietnam was a particularly brutal case because the soldiers were, the military was staffed by conscription. People that really didn't even want to be there. They'd never been interested in the military in their life.
Right.
They go off and they're fighting an irregular war against people who are the acknowledged masters of jungle warfare, which is the most horrific way to fight a war in the jungle. And they're fighting people who are fighting to the. They're going to the max. That's their view of war. None of this clean war that's not the theory of warfare that we're actually doing. So you're a conscript. You're hanging there. This country. You're watching bungee traps. As you say, you're killed. Maybe if you fall into their hands, they'll torture you or something like that. The Vietnamese did this, but the Viet Cong did it as a matter of public policy, actually, torture and terror. So you're shot. You've come to grips with these bastards who keep just disappearing into the woods. Here's something horrific. To the States, you basically do 30 years of hell based on. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that you don't deserve it. What I'm saying is you're responsible for your actions. In any way that you atone for it, how are you going to go to victims, the families of the people that you've killed? Explain. I've too. But you may well.
Well, that's the thing, though. We seem like we act like that is impossible, and I'll bet nobody else picked out what you said. I'm good at it, but because you're getting it's garbly every once in a while. But you can. That's the weird thing. So with this New Yorker magazine thing, they're there with Kong, who is like 4 or 5. He was told, his family was told to get out of their hut. Then they were shut. They had a little, like a bunker, you know, just probably a hole dug in the hut for if there's bombing. And they were in there. They were grabbed and told to get out. And then they were shoved back in there. And the Americans threw a grenade in there, pap, pap, pap. And the kid survived. And this guy was not anti-American. He was talking to Seymour Hersh. He had a conversation with one of the guys that was there and did that massacre. Could have been a guy that did it to his family for all he knows. And all he wanted was more than the word "I'm sorry." Talk to me about what happened. Talk to me about he was asking him, could you eat a meal when you went back to the base? Could you eat? He wanted to know how he felt. You know, he was willing to say, look, you are a victim. What was your victimology in this? How did this affect you? You should have been feeling terrible about this. He wanted to hear that. He was ready to go, you're a co-victim with me in this whole atrocity of war and the commanders, because that's the other thing. I don't know much about the Asian cultures were so unknown to me as a child, and I've tried to learn more. My impression of Vietnam, it's like Iran. I see it as, you know, drinking strong coffee and a lot of talking philosophy and sort of, you know, so anyway, this guy at any rate saw a big picture, willing to blame war and the establishment war and the hires up and the cover-ups. All this guy had to do to get more of his forgiveness was say more than "I'm sorry" and actually go in, let himself break down if that's what it was going to be. Show his own vulnerability as having been the perpetrator victim. You know, if that's possible, which I think in war it is. So I think we need to open our minds to the fact that it is possible. I mean, I'm curious. Can we change this topic to the same topic? But here's an example. For example, I think we should give the Black Hills back to the Lakota right now, 21st century. Boom, we broke the law. It's obvious. There's a paper trail. That we made a truce because we were not beating their ass, and then we made a truce and backstabbed the truce and broke it. They should get the Black Hills back. What do you think of that? Is that too extreme, or?
Well, no, I'm a Canadian, as you know, and we have treaties like that. Our treaties are still law. You know, it's a huge issue there. But if the United States has no legal right to be in Black Hills, I guess you can take it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I could tell you the history. So the history is real clear, okay? And mind you, it's not like the Lakota were in the Black Hills forever. They stole it from the Cheyenne in the 1700s on horsebacks and maybe with rifles for all I know, right? So, okay, but the fact is, we were having an Indian war. We were trying to let our pioneers go out to the west. When they would pass through the plains, they would get raided, and we were fighting a war, and we were not winning it. So we made a truce with the Lakota and said, you can have the Black Hills, which is like a nice piece of land. There's mountains and rivers, and it's beautiful. And as opposed to all the plains that are around it where there was, some animals, but basically, it was a nice place and they owned it, and so it's like, we acknowledge that, fine. Well, and then Custer went through there just a few years later, the area, had a geologist, they found gold, and Americans just went onto this reservation, went onto this area, and it ended up getting annexed a few years subsequent. And so, I mean, they were granted that land because of a war treaty. Not us being nice to primitive people, no, but because they were able to fight war with us for years among the Indians that were allies. A lot of these Indians are way more sophisticated in diplomacy and stuff than Americans seem to realize. I mean, why do you think the Indians were able to make friends with the French and fight, and friends with the British sometimes? They were regular nations, a lot more regular and modern than we think. So we did not beat them all, and we made a truce that we broke. So yeah, you can go back and give that reparation. Now, you can't just say, hey, all you haoles, that's what we call white people in Hawaii, I'm sticking with that term, move out of the Black Hills. No, it should be a normal process where, yeah, you can have that back, but you can't rape, you're gonna have to follow civil rights and stuff, and people that own a house, they might want to sell the house and leave, maybe they want to be part of the U.S. still, but, you wouldn't just nationalize everybody's property at this point. You have some, you don't just make more victims. you know.
Yeah,
And you see the same thing actually with Israel. There's an Israel issue. Just sorry to go on a little bit too long extra, but Israel, same thing. It's like, I think it was good that there was Jewish settlements. I think it was good to let Jewish people repatriate to this part of the world they still remembered they were from thousands of years ago in some cases. But actually kicking out all the Palestinians and creating another, that can't be the way you do that. You know, your reparations can't totally be, well, we'll just fuck over the other people that have been hanging out there, and now they have a gripe. So, but you can do things like that. And actually, the Palestinians back in the 30s, my understanding of the history is they were absolutely fine and welcoming of the Jewish settlements that were being built, you know, on empty land in that area. That was not a problem for them.
Yeah, oh yeah, it didn't really have to turn out the way it turned out, but Hitler had something to do with the desperation that that broke out in the late 19th century. But originally, yeah, there was nothing inevitable about what actually happened. Absolutely, right. There's another instance of guilt is predicting a peace settlement. Side is saying it's not up to me to move an inch. You're the SOB that has to do that, because the Israelis, will say quite correctly, we're democratic. We try to respect the rule of law. We're a zillion times higher than yours. If anybody on our side harms one of yours, he's dealt with actually whatever, that kind of thing. The usual arguments that which are correct actually. And of course, the Palestinians will say that the land isn't war. Maybe even if we accept the existence of Israel, and if we see 7 borders, what's your legal basis for being on any of our land at all?
Well, what do you think they should do over there?
What do I think?
Yeah, I know you're not an expert. You can't say, you're not deciding and blah, blah, blah like that. But what do you think? Like, what's your take on how could this go on a road to not being such a ridiculously dangerous place for people living there in the whole world?
Well, I've thought about it. I've had discussions about it. Here's my plan. There's a British base territory about an hour's jet from Israel. And a gigantic NATO base built there, an air base. So we have leaders ready to scramble at any moment for any existential threat to Israel. Israel should be included in NATO, or at least thrown under the control of NATO in every way. Israel's security is guaranteed for all time. With a credible threat of military intervention to guard Israel's existence, and an obvious, like maybe the NATO troops stationed in Israel, an entire division of if necessary.
Uh-huh.
On the other hand, we were told if you leave the West Bank as a strip,
yeah,
you have to accommodate both sides.
So I missed some of the words. You're saying go ahead and Gaza Strip and West Bank or whatever, a 2-state solution with those territories, basically. Is that the idea? Yeah. But you are pro-Israel, or worried about Israel enough that it's like, hey, we can't leave them out in the cold at this point. We've also got to this point. There is Israel now, and so we should continue to be their military, protector, vice versa. And that's okay. Europe, and you're saying make them in NATO. You're actually, let's go ahead and formalize why the British let Israel happen in the first place, which was to have a bit of Europe in the Middle East. Let's face it, that wasn't the guilt, in my view. But anyway, so yeah, I could see that. I mean, I basically believe the same, except for I'm not that concerned that there's going to be a problem of Israel defending itself. But I think you're probably right. It's good to make that part vocal, and I don't oppose it. And I think it's pretty clear you need a 2-state solution. I mean, the ideal thing is just have a 1-state solution and let everybody vote. But let's face, we know how those kinds of things go. When there's actual animosity of this extreme, you're probably better off having your own country and doing your diplomatic relations over a border rather than in a Congress, where we see what's going on in the U.S. when it falls apart. Better to have your enemies with their own government structure and talk through diplomats that are good at it, whereas legislators they'll be at each other's throats for hundreds of years sometimes. So interesting, yeah.
Right now, the whole thing is so bogged down in guilt and blame. Whose fault is this? Whose fault? And what should we do about it? What should we do about the fact that it's the other guy's fault? Well, we should
See, I think that's related to this error of being thing I'm talking about. What kind of persons are we dealing with? What do they, as their kind of person that they are to be, is, what do they deserve? What is the thing that they deserve? Where is the place that they deserve to be? As opposed to, what's going on? Which parts of what's going on do we not like? What's happening? What will happen if we do this? It's like Hannity wants Iran to apologize for everything they've done. And it's like, is he going to offer to apologize for the Shah and the things we've done? Well, no, it's American acceptable. It's like, look, none of that matters. What matters is, are you going to have a bomb? Are you going to have, what happens as a result of the agreement you make? It's not about, but wait, is that the right kind of thing to say to somebody that is this kind of person? That doesn't matter whether it is or not. So
we have a real issue, and that's how I see. That's how I see the Israel-Palestine thing. It's strictly conflict resolution. That's it.
Yeah.
And that's I'm still amazed that the Irish managed to make peace, because to this day the two sides hate each other's guts like you wouldn't believe. But
I'll tell you one thing. I actually think that letting Iran's influence set in the Middle East settle to its sort of historically natural, whether that's good or bad, historically natural level, right? Because that was one of the only places that really pulled together what we would think of as a nation type empire ever. That they don't want a disturbed Middle East. They don't want to. They might use the rhetoric, but my belief is they don't want to blow up Israel so much to actually nuke Israel and waste the Middle East. They care about it. They care about it in an ancient way, and they would rather play this game of economic politics than let the region be destabilized. I think they know that the destabilization of that region is of benefit to certain people, specifically your Halliburtons or people that are able to make it a profit center in various ways, military industry basically. So I actually think we'll be better off letting the Iranians have more influence in that area. I think that will actually make it more stable. And I don't know, do you remember this? There were people in Iran and Israel talking to each other, in the 90s. Because because remember the Iranians, of course, there were CIA contacts, and from when they were a puppet, well, that structure didn't go away, and they still knew that stability in the region was in there. They were cooperating under the grounds of this radical religious, hatred that's on the surface, and I really think that, and as with all the problems that we've seen in Iran, the fact is, how many religious revolutions do you see where they even try to create a secular government? Whether that president is a puppet or he answers to the Ayatollah or whatever, just even setting up this structure of trying to democratize your nation after you've had to use fundamentalist religion to get your freedom, that's rare. The Iranians have a long history of intellect and big picture and wanting, sure, they want an empire like all of us, and that's ugly like all of us, but they also wanted stability. The Pax Romana, the Chinese peace, they don't want to just destroy the world like an ISIS. I couldn't say the same about ISIS. They're blowing up ancient cities for no reason. They're just like guys out there with their dicks waving around and guns. That's not how the Iranians are. And I think, we can give a lot of this problem to the Iranians, and the Iranians will actually work on it and solve it over 100 years or whatever. I have.
They'll also be the ones that'll prevent more insane sectarian conflict by at least helping the Shia in the Yemen. The Shia bunch of rebels are going to take over the country, like it, unless of course the Arabs do something. But I can see that. But right now it's actually looking as though it's one side is talking with the other when it comes to the Sunni Shia fight. I think actually that the Sunni Shia way bigger than the anti-American and
Oh yeah, no,
anti-Israel.
that's fascinating too. Yeah, and this is another thing of how badly, as so much Americans have seemed to have badly played geopolitics. Um, to not real. I mean, because yeah, the Shia Sunni thing goes back to Muhammad died, and who killed who, and who should have been the next dude, and it's like a drama where one side is like he's our leader, and the other side's like, yeah, well, he killed Fatima. You know what I mean? It's like a big schism from the beginning. And also, the thing is, if you're just trying to be geopolitical and be cold about it, like, I don't care, I'm just going to play them against each other, which I don't encourage, but I mean, it's always surprising to me when people don't even use their best interest when they're playing these dirty tricks. They don't even look. The Shia are the huge minority. We'd
Yeah.
be better off in this geopolitical sense, not that I'm advocating, but with a Shia-dominated Middle East. Why? Because then that separates them from the billions of Sunnis in Indonesia, and the ones they're trying to blow us up are in the Middle East, and the billions of them that might be sending money and stuff are elsewhere. It would actually make more sense. But that's not why I have a kind of faith. It's just from looking at history. I think Iran is an amazing culture. It's a place that connected China, connected Asia and the Roman Empire as long back as then, and I just think that a steady state solution is for them to recreate stability in the region.
Oh yeah, I should say so, and I think that most Iranians actually want that. I think that they're just using the Israel thing and the American thing and the nuclear bomb thing, and the same with North Korea. They need to distract their own people from the horrific problems that they've got. Iran is one of the worst drug problems in the world.
Oh really? I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised because there's a history of.
Yeah, like you go to.
Well, I mean, there's a history of them knowing about opiates, right? Because in India, right, isn't that basically the most ancient place that knew about the opiates? And so Iran was, again, the Silk Road ending in Iran. I don't know where it literally ends, but basically, they went one way to trade with China. And I mean, Romans loved their Chinese silk, didn't even know what China was. And, these are the people that brought that together. That and millions of Chinese merchants, which is another amazing story. But yeah, interesting. No, I didn't know they had. So what kind of drug problem you mean? I mean, I was just assuming the opiates or hashish or just in general.
Oh, the cheap designer drugs, junk drugs.
Really?
I guess they're having some sort of existential crisis as a society or something.
Interesting.
So so the Iranians, if you ask me, like their country is growing fast economically and socially. They produce the most scientists, or they're growing exponentially in terms of scientific achievement. They're also battling horrific problems.
Interesting. I guess I'm not that surprised because in that sense, even though they cut themselves off from the West in one sense, well, no, in North Korea, none of those people have seen our sitcoms. No, Iranians can see all that. They can learn all that, and they travel around and find out. It's never been hidden from them what's going on in the modern world. So I guess I'm not that surprised if they're up to date with us, where these what the current drug culture that's really damaging, and it's an escapist. Like it's because of the chaos of our society, and they're over right in the middle of it. We like to put our heads over there, but they're actually over there dealing with it.
We're dealing with exactly that problem that you and I began this discussion with. We're dealing with somebody taking all the certainties of it, and they're never going to come back. Sure. They closed Islamized society for 1,000 years, 2,000 years, whatever. That is gone forever. And it's happening so rapidly with orientation. What do you do? Well, you
Man, I really dislike Obama in so many ways. But I'm going to have to give him some credit. I mean, I think he screwed up this system, this Obamacare. It's all screwed up, but I think it's kind of like the only way you could have got it in the system at all. But if this at all sticks, or even him trying normalizing relationships with Cuba and sort of beginning a kind of a normalization with Iran, You got a legacy, dude. I think you're a slightly conservative backstabber that gave $1 trillion to the banks, but okay, I'll sign off on your history book because that's huge. I my whole life have wanted to see both of those things, and so I got to give him credit. I'm surprised he's pulling that out, and I think it's really productive.
Well, yeah, well, it's the old only Nixon China thing. Yeah. What trouble have the Iranians caused us apart from them beaking off for the last 20 years? Almost none.
No, they say, oh, supporting terrorism, and it's like, yeah.
That's you're going to say
no there's no real evidence, and they haven't supported it with as many billions as we know Saudi Arabian royal family even has. So, I mean, well, yeah, let's get into the details. Basically, nothing, okay? Or we would say, look, no, there's a burnt, they bombed Pearl Harbor. Yeah, we would know if they'd done something. They hadn't. It's all been pumped up. And that's what I'm saying, too. It was amazing how quick they went to say, look, we're not going to be a religiously fanatical. Yeah, we are, but hey, we're going to create a president. We're going to try to have the secular government, separation of church and government, even though the church is higher in the end. But people can have their ideas. Yeah, the church might veto your idea, but there's a lot more freedom there than you see in North Korea. Other places that had these radical kinds of revolutions, they don't immediately turn around. Or who were those people in Burma where they went in and blew up, who was that? Was it Pol Pot? They went in, not Burma, but I think it was Pol Pot in Cambodia. No, it was also the Burmese. They had a couple revolutions where they came in from the jungle to the city, killed everybody, emptied out the city, went back in the jungle, and you've got a government that is now controlling the country that you can't even get to. They're just, how many, whereas the Iranians were immediately, okay, we've taken it from the West, now let's start building a government. I mean, that's pretty impressive as a culture. It is.
And apart from their rhetoric, they're actually not as crazy as they're often portrayed to be. Their rhetoric is insane, if you ask me.
Yeah,
they got to keep their. But then again, they're just trying to funnel the chaos out into the foreign area.
Yeah.
When you think about all the trouble that the West has dealt with in terms of violent Islamic fundamentalism, they've all been funny, and we're just starting to clue in now the difference between the Sunni and the Shia. So it's the thing when they finally clued in the difference between the Chinese communists and the Russian communists, they knew that these two groups hated each other. Yeah. Opportunity. Maybe Obama's doing it. He needs the Iranians to help him deal with ISIS, to help him deal with Al-Qaeda, to help him deal with all these Sunni fanatics out there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I think the fanatical rhetoric we're getting from Iran, certain mullahs, and certainly from Ahmadinejad or whatever, I think a lot of it's political theater. Netanyahu is saying things that are over the top and stuff too. On the other hand, I do think it's legitimately dangerous, and there's people that believe that, and there's people that would bomb Israel and not worry about destroying the Middle East. I think that's over there, but my solution is, that's why I've been wanting to normalize the relationships. This is a society where if we just give a hand to the scientists and the diplomats and the stuff, they don't have to say they're in love with Israel to be practical and have diplomatic improvements. And we want to feed that part of the society. Otherwise, we're going to keep feeding the radicals. So I think the Iranians show a great amount of trying to limit radicalism, considering how far radical they had to become to kick the British and the U.S. out. So I think fair enough there, but it's still dangerous. Don't get me wrong. I think the wrong person in control, but it goes of Israel too. It's not entirely inconceivable that some nut in Israel, some colonel, and you've got Dr. Strangelove, and he's nuking Iran. I mean, that's volatile. So in both cases, we want to extend a hand to the people that want to be rational before the fundamentalists reach the button, kind of thing. So, but anyway. I'm going to have to go pretty soon here, but not right away. Why don't you have a final say, and we'll wrap it up, because I'm going to have to get back to work.
No problem. Oh, I was just going to say if you look at the Middle East and you look at the Islamic world, you're going to say, assuming that there's any potential at all for future growth, where can I look? Only Iran and Indonesia. That's about it. All the other places are going down. So making peace with the Iranians does seem to be a logical thing to do, but again, Iran has something that the Americans need, stay away from Israel and don't undermine the Saudis, that kind of thing. So, you know, if they can give the Iranians something, the Iranians will keep their mouths shut and stop funding their proxy, you know, soldiers in places like Iraq and in Yemen now. But, you know,
you say the Saudis. I mean, that's when I don't think there'll ever be stability over there until the Saudis have a different government. Personally, I think they're the most nefarious, not, you know, even though they're in the region, they live off of this instability, and they've invented this, we're pro-American and we'll invent the most anti-American version of Muslim schools we could think of, and they're playing this game that, look, there's no redeeming that. There's no redeeming the twisted, blankly lie, they're the problem over there, if you ask me.
I know, but all I'm saying is I'm just saying that the Americans might tell the Iranians not to undermine the Saudis, not because the Saudis don't bloody deserve to be undermined or that they need to get undermined. Do we want the Iranians destabilizing Saudi Arabia to the point where it might explode internally? You know,
yeah, no, don't get me wrong. If I was president, I would be totally fine. I would say the same thing. Don't undermine the Saudis. It's just that because with diplomacy, and I don't even want to undermine them, but I think through diplomacy, we need to start insisting on, you know what, we decided we're against beheadings, and you guys actually do it all the time as a criminal thing. Let's, you know, we should try to, we have to work on them. I agree. You know, it's, again, the only Nixon could go to China. I think only we can work with the South. I mean, I don't think, you know, a war between Iran and Saudi Arabia would be good for nobody. So, yeah, you would have to, I agree, and that's your point about just maybe double down. There's plenty of military over there now, but double down on, look, if shit gets going, you know we have allies, and we're going to be bombing for them and not for you, so just keep it cool as far as all-out war. Yeah, I think that's as good an idea as any, but at least it gets into those concepts involved, which is sort of the point of conversing. So who knows how that would work out, but I think there's a lot of interesting ideas come out of that. So anyway, well, I'm going to run. It's been nice talking to you. I understood you a lot of time, but it was choppy enough. Probably other people didn't. There might be something with whether you face the phone, or I'm not sure that it's the internet, but also you're on a phone. I think it said you were mobile or something, so sometimes you get garbled things from that. But I could understand you, so we'll see if people complain. They might only have heard what I was saying to you. But anyway, very interesting conversation. Thanks for showing up.
All right.
And I'm going to do it again next week, so try to be good at this. All right. Thanks a lot, Anakadavai. Take it easy.
Bye-bye.